Let's learn how to deploy a project with Docker. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we'll learn the basics of deploying with Docker, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. It seems like every time I try to rely on a free hosting service or other service for my students, the rug gets pulled out from under me and that free tier is removed. And we've gone through this with Heroku and REPL when they also removed their teams for education and now have paid deployments. And just recently PlanetScale removed their free MySQL tier. And I agree with this tweet as well. So I hope I'm not jinxing myself today. We're going to learn how to easily deploy a PHP Apache server with a Docker container on render.com. So what is Docker? Well, think of it as a tool where you can package everything up neatly, all of the dependencies and settings that are required to run your project into a container. And then that container can be shipped to other computers and run on those computers just like it does yours. One way to do this is build a Docker file, and then we can ship the Docker file with the rest of our code repository to GitHub, which can automatically deploy this to a host like render.com, and render.com will build our Docker container based on that Docker file. And that's what we're going to look at today. So let's go to VS Code. We're in VS Code and I have my Docker file open. And really this is the only required file. However, you're going to see that we'll use a couple more files today as well. Let's quickly go through this. I already have it annotated for you. So we start at the top and we're using an official PHP runtime parent image. So you have Docker images that you can create containers from. And this says from, and then we're pulling in this PHP 8.2 with Apache image. Now you can go to Docker Hub to look up images about this, and I'm going to quickly show you the Docker Hub page. So here I'm at Docker Hub, which is really hub.docker.com, and you can search for images, and you can see I've already pulled up PHP, and it has an official Docker image, but there are different images of PHP. So I wanted the latest version, essentially 8.2, and if we scroll down, you can see where they show from PHP 8.2 here. Now notice this isn't what I'm using as a parent image, I'm using one with Apache also. So let's scroll down a little further where it discusses Apache, and one thing I wanted to point out when I find where this is, that they don't actually use the latest one in their Apache example. So you could use PHP 7.2, but really PHP 8.2 is available. So that's what I'm going to use. And I just plugged the number 8.2 in here instead of 7.2. So this is how we pull this Docker image in, the parent image, and we're going to base the image we build on this official PHP Apache image. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the video. You may be surprised to learn that 3 out of every 4 viewers, nearly 75% of all people who watch my channel, aren't subscribed. So I just wanted to take a quick second and remind you to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. And if you really like my videos, you can get exclusive content and support my channel even more by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/DaveGray. Thanks for your consideration. And now back to the video. And now back in VS Code, after we've pulled in the parent image, we want to configure our container. So one thing we want to do is install any required system packages and dependencies. Now this is something that I needed for Postgres SQL, and I'm going to tell you how I figured out that I needed this. I didn't just know this. I actually had an error. And when I had that error, I pasted it into ChatGPT and I said, what is this error telling me? And it said, hey, you need to install these required system packages and dependencies. I don't work with PHP every day, and I don't even work in Linux every day, which is essentially what this is building, is a Linux system that you're working inside of. So ChatGPT helped me know these requirements. Now we'll get down to the Postgres SQL requirement that I put in that then required that I use this. Okay, after that, we also set up a working directory in the container, and then we copy in the current directory contents into the container. So you can see that as well. And then I've got a comment here because with PHP, you can use Composer to manage your dependencies. I'm not, but I wanted to leave this note in here just in case. And then under this, it says if you have any specific PHP extensions required, you could install them here. For example, if you need MySQL support, and there's a line for that I have commented out. However, I wanted Postgres. Now there's a reason we're using Postgres and not MySQL. And here's the reason why. I'm in the render.com docs, and they do let you deploy MySQL, but the reason I'm not having my students use it here is because they will ask you for a credit card. It has to be with a paid account. So not everything at render.com is free. And if I click their deploy to render, trying to set up MySQL, it's going to ask me for a card number right away. So you can tell that's not what I want my students to do. All right, we are back in the Docker file here in VS Code, and now we're looking at adding Postgres support because we couldn't use MySQL for free on render. Postgres, however, can be used. And so you set up a separate Postgres database on render.com. And there's docs about how to do that. That's not what this video about. This is just about Docker. We need our PHP Apache server to go ahead and support Postgres. And that's what this line does. So we run this line that goes ahead and applies Postgres or makes it available to our PHP server that's running on Apache. Okay, then we have an Apache config file. Now here's an example once again of using ChatGPT. I'll click on this apache.conf, which is the config file. And if you don't understand anything over here, or if you haven't worked with an Apache server, just take this file and paste it into ChatGPT where it can explain each thing to you. Once again, this video is not specifically about an Apache server. However, you might want to know what each one of these things does, and that's a good way to have it explained to you bit by bit. Okay, after that, we have an Apache module here that runs a rewrite, and then notice this line here where we run echo, and then we're going to bind to this IP address that's 4 zeros and then port 80. This is important when we deploy. I want this commented out. I don't want this right now as we build the image to check it on our computer. But then before we send the code to GitHub, I want to uncomment this line because render does require this binding to this specific IP address. Then this note about variable names here for environment variables. But we don't want to supply these here. You can supply these in your dashboard for your project in render.com, and you never want to push your secrets like your environment variable values to GitHub where a bot could come along and steal those. So I don't recommend using this here. Then we're just exposing port 80, which is a typical port for web traffic. So again, a quick rundown of the Docker file, but explanations here in the comments for everything. And if you don't understand anything, yes, ChatGPT and other AI might be good with config files, and it can explain any piece of this to you. Now, as I said, this would be the only file you would truly need. Of course, we needed the Apache config for our Apache server as well, but it is common to use a Docker compose YAML file. So let me click on that. You can see it's docker-compose.yml, which is just pronounced YAML. And then here, you could have more than one service. So imagine you didn't just have Apache running here with PHP, you also possibly had PHP MyAdmin or MySQL or other services that were also running. So they would each have a place here in this file. We only need the PHP Apache service. We are running a separate Postgres database on render as well. So you can see this is a very simple file. It has the name of the service under service. It has a version at the top, and then under build, it has a context, and the context simply is a dot, meaning right where you are. And then the Docker file is listed with the name of the Docker file, and we can see that over here. Port, we're not translating any other port, like port 8000 would be translated to 80 if we put 8000 over here on the left, but this is just 80 going straight to 80. And then this shows the volumes, which matches what we had back here in the Docker file, as we showed right here under the working directory as well. So it doubles up on a couple of things, and really the Docker compose file becomes more handy or easier to understand when you see several services here listed and you're identifying each one. Oh, and once again, you can pass environment variables in a Docker Compose YAML also. Again, I don't recommend it. This file will also be pushed to GitHub. Okay, with the required files in place, let's quickly look at some commands. I've got a markdown file over here that I put some Docker terminal commands in. I also kind of put a definition of Docker up here to help you understand what it is, and a link so you can also download Docker, because you should do that before we attempt to run any of these commands or they won't work. So I've loaded the link in and we're on the Get Docker page. Just pick the version for your operating system. It's also going to install Docker Desktop. So not just Docker commands that we can run in the terminal. However, I'm not going to use Docker Desktop today. And we're back in VS Code. Now, before we run any of these commands, make sure you have Docker installed and everything says it's okay. Then note that I also do have just a simple index.php over here in the file tree as an example, and it's printing out the server variables. Well, it has the site URL if that exists, if that is set in your environment, but it prints out the server variables as well. And then PHP info, which will give a page full of info about the current version of PHP that's running on the Apache server. So we'll see a lot on the web page. And of course, you don't have to use this. This is just an example index.php file. Okay, back to those commands, and we're ready to build our image. And this is incorrect. I'm going to remove that --rm. You want docker build -t, the image name, and then once again the period, meaning build it right here. So let's go ahead and open up the terminal, and I'm going to say, let me pull this down where we can see it. Here we go. Now I want my fingers on the right letters, docker build -t, and now I'm going to call this my PHP server, my-php server, and then I want to build it right here. So I'll press enter. Now this is going to take a little bit, so I'll fast forward and come back when it finishes. Okay, it is finished. Now I'm going to pull this down just a little bit more, and you see we can list images here. I'll do that. And then I also want to run the image, and it will actually run the container. So I'll say docker-compose up here, and I noticed I haven't saved this file. So now that I've finished that, let's first list out the image. So docker image ls, and there it is. My PHP server is listed as the image that has been built. So now we'll say docker-compose up. And this should get everything running as we expect it to. Now it should run on localhost on our computer. This may take just a little bit too. I think it's ready to go though. So let me pull up the browser, and I'm just going to type localhost and then space over. And there's our PHP page. So what I have here is that full array of server variables. I don't think we had the site URL environment variable set yet. But if we deploy and then we set that on render, we could test that out as well, just to make sure it's reading those environment variables. So we see all of this information here, and that's from that server variable. And now here starts the PHP info, and you can see I'm running 8.2.16. So we have Apache and PHP running in a container on our computer, and everything looks exactly like I expected it to. So now we're ready to deploy this to GitHub. I'm back in VS Code. Now we want to exit this inside of our terminal, so I'm going to press Control-C, and that should exit the running container. And notice I don't have a Git repository over here yet, so I'm going to say git init, and this should initialize the repository. Now all the files turned green, and I have a .git folder over here. If you don't have that, that means your VS Code settings have hidden this. And of course, you need to already have Git installed to use Git, and then of course push the code to GitHub. And I have a separate video about that I'll try to remember to bring up a link here right on the video, and I'll try to remember to put it in the video description as well for you. So if you're not familiar with Git and GitHub, you could learn about that as well, because I just initialized a Git repository here in this directory. Now I'm going to add all the files with git add and a period, and that should add all those files. Now, a note to my students, if you have an entire project in PHP, not only would you want your index.php here, you would want all of your other folders and files as well. And of course, if you have any secrets in an environment variable file, you don't want to send that to GitHub. So create a .gitignore file and list that file in the .gitignore so it is not sent to GitHub. I don't have any secrets here, so I'm not worried about that. So I've added everything, and I need a git commit, and I'll put in a message here, and I'll just say completed building container, and now we have everything ready to go. And we're not really sending the container to GitHub, we're sending the Docker file that it will be built from once again. This creates an image, then of course builds the container and then allows that container to be ran. So then we're ready to create a GitHub repository. Okay, I've pulled up my GitHub. I'm going to click New to create a new repository, and I need a name here, so I'm going to call this php-apache-docker. And then I will link to this in the video description as well, so you can clone and get these files from my repository if you want to, or you could fork it over to your GitHub and then get the files that way. Okay, so php-apache-docker. I'm going to leave this as a public directory. Scroll down here and create repository. Now that I have that, I've already got an existing repository on my computer. So from the command line, I just want these 3 commands here. So I'm going to copy all 3 of those. Let's go back to VS Code. Hey, I'm back in VS Code. Let's open a terminal window. I can right click here and it will run the first 2 of the 3 commands. And now we're ready to just press enter to run that last command. And now I'm doing that, and it is pushing this code to GitHub. Back in GitHub, let's see if our code is now there. I'll click on the project name, and yes, the code is here. Now I'm going to update this README after I create this video, so you'll see a little more here, but all the files will remain the same. Now I'm at render.com. If you don't have an account at render.com already, you'll need to create one. I think they let you sign in with Google, GitHub, and the different various sign-ins that way as well if you don't want to create your own based on your email. So I'm just going to click dashboard, and I'm probably logged in. Yep, here I am. So I'm ready to create a new web service. And now I want to build and deploy from a Git repository. So that means I have connected my GitHub to my Render account. So if you sign up for a new account, the best way to do it is just use it with your GitHub account. So from there, I'm going to click next, and it's going to pull in my repository list here, and I'll have to remember that PHP Apache Docker says it was created 1 minute ago. Hey, that looks great. Let's click connect, and it should be able to pull this code in. Scroll down here. I really can leave everything the way it is. The runtime is already set as Docker, and that's what I need. This is what I need though, free, not the starter package, just free. And if it goes to sleep, it won't stay awake the entire time. That's fine. But it just takes a little while for your application to fire back up after it goes to sleep. So we've got a free one, and here is where you would put in any environment variables. Say you needed to put in your connection string to your Postgres database. It goes in the optional environment variable section. And after that, you just click create web service, and it begins to build the image, which will eventually run the container. Here it says completed building container already. Well, that's great. So we come down here, it says no logs to show, but I assume there will be some logs. I'll come back when this finishes. And Render has completed the build, and it says your service is live. This is the success message you want. And by the way, I should point out, you might get a warning that says could not reliably determine the server's fully qualified domain name. That's okay, don't worry about that warning. But the service is live, we're ready to check it out. Let's scroll back up here, and they give you a URL. So you should just be able to click this URL, which has my name here, php-apache-docker.onrender.com. If I click that, here is the web page, same one we had running on our computer, but now running at render.com for free as a web service. You could turn this into an API or PHP project, whatever you might want to do with your PHP and Apache, but it is running for free in a Docker container on render.com. Hey guys, I recently started a Patreon and I'm already giving shout outs to Holy Coder, who is a progress provider, and Eldad, who joined at the senior member level. Also shout outs to all of the junior members that have joined. Thank you all so much. You're helping me reach my goals. And if you haven't joined, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/DaveGray. I've got exclusive content there that you won't find on YouTube, and I've also got early release content. Hope to see you there. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.